Well, hello, everybody. We've got a pretty good group here. I'm so excited for you all to be here and for us to talk about a little bit about sleep. So this class is focused on creating a sleep formula for ourselves. Of course, if you're a practitioner, you might learn some things that are helpful with your clients. But really the main focus is going to be on like looking at ourselves and things that can help with that. That being said, if you have questions about pathologies or more in-depth things, you're welcome to email the school. We have an hour, which I will probably go over on. It'll be recorded if you can't stay and I end up going over. But we aren't going to have time to address individual pathologies and more causes of sleep issues in depth in this short amount of time, because I really want to be able to get through the introductory material and focus on the herbs part. Um, um, so my name is Mel. I am Thomas's colleague. I am the clinical director for the Eclectic School. I also do quite a bit of teaching. And this year, I will be the primary instructor for our free clinic series. So a free clinic series for our free class series. So we're going to have a free class every month. They're going to be a mix of classes like this, how to create a formula, for ourselves and our families. We're going to have some really fun Q&As with some, famous herbalists like Rosalie De La Forte, Jim McDonald, Laura Ash on various topics. And additionally, we have a free clinic at the school. So if anyone is dealing with a health issue, sleep or otherwise, that you feel like is a little bit more challenging or you could use some, clinical eyes on, we are happy to get you set up with a student practitioner. And some of the foundational material that I'm talking about today is a part of our foundational program, which is the first tier of our clinical program. Program has 4 tiers. Foundational is the beginning. So some of this material is a part of what we call building health. And I like to tell folks, and so does Thomas, that the reason that we talk about things other than herbs as herbalists is because, generally speaking, I don't have a blue vervain deficiency, right? Blue vervain might help with my anxiety. It might help with my muscle tension. It's not going to cure my B12 deficiency, my horrid insomnia, or other pathologies. So herbs are helpful and supportive for symptoms, for our qualities, for that lived experience of the things that, that health and the way that we experience health. But if we're not looking at ourselves holistically, then we're going to miss out on a lot of things. And maybe we might not even think that herbs work, because maybe herbs alone won't work in every circumstance. And so today we are going to talk about some considerations in building a formula for sleep. And that is going to include, if you stick around, because hopefully we'll get it through in an hour, I'm going to do some considerations. We're going to talk a little bit about the nitty gritty of formulating, things to consider. We're going to briefly go over a big handful of herbs. And then I'd love after that for folks that stay to throw out scenarios. So we're not going to do case studies, right? We're not going to do an intake, but saying like, here's my lived experience of sleep. Here's what happens. Here's what's in my thoughts, and then we'll build a formula together to kind of see how that looks in real time. Because it's easy to talk about, but a little bit harder to apply. And we have the lovely Tiffany here to answer any of your questions. She is going to go ahead and call out some of the questions. If she deems a question maybe too big, we might wait till the end to do that, but we'll let her divert. And if you really have something and you don't get noticed, just blurt it on out and happy to stop. This is, although this is a class, we're pretty informal when it comes to our free classes and love discussion. All right, so I'm going to pull my notes up here and we'll get started on pastime. All right, so we're going to talk about how to build a sleep formula for ourselves. Just like I said in the beginning, this also might apply to your clients, but take it with a grain of salt, knowing that it's also important when you're working with clients to look at underlying pathologies and root causes. Some general things, since this is the first class in our series, I'm going to just talk about a couple of things that are important in formulation in general. So super important for a sleep formula, but just as important for a digestive system formula, or maybe something topical for muscle pain. So context is everything. Formulation varies really dramatically based on the situation and the resources that we have. What works in a fully stocked apothecary, like the eclectic schools who we're serving, 20, 30 clients a week, maybe even more, fully stocked. Every herb you could possibly think of, almost, really differs from a home apothecary. And knowing that herbalism is a science and an art. And so formulation, consequently, is a science and an art. It's a little bit of math. It's a little bit of the painting. And so there is no wrong way to formulate. And that's why we're going to start by talking about general categories of herbs before we dive into really specific herbs, because it's not necessarily always about having that exact right herb. It's about what you have and how to work with what you have to support yourself. And that is a cornerstone of home herbalism. No matter what you do with herbs, what you do at home is about what's available and how creative you can get with what you have and how to stock. So there's no wrong way to formulate. We think about it in terms of effectiveness rather than what's right or wrong. So this is, especially within ourselves, with safety in mind, we want to play. We want to play with these formulas. We want to try different preparations. We want to try different different herbs by themselves and in combination to see what feels best in our bodies. And we can do this with our family and our friends as well. And so we want to focus on increasing our levels of effectiveness. We want the goal to be to take as little herb as possible to get the maximum effect. And so keys to success when it comes to formulating is we want to match herbs to specific patterns. And we're going to go over all of this. We also want to pay close attention to dosage, preparation method, and timing. So the right herb at the wrong dose is still not going to work, right? So maybe let's think of an herb like ashwagandha that needs a very high dose, and you want to get the herb in your body. So an ashwagandha tincture, it might make you feel a little bit relaxed, but it's not going to have that long-term chronic resiliency building effect of taking 1,000 milligrams of ashwagandha 2 or 3 times a day, because ashwagandha was historically used as a food like herb. It was mixed with honey. You are taking the actual whole herb into your body. And so if you don't pay attention to preparation method when you're using herbs, you might think that that isn't the right herb for you, or that that herb doesn't work, but it might just be you're not taking enough. Or if you get side effects, maybe you're taking too much. You want to consider immediate support. So what's going on right now? What is my lived experience? What am I feeling in my body? And what herbs can I use to get the effect that I want? And then you also want to think about long-term support, especially if there's any stress or anxiety, probably with the world we live in now. If there's stress and anxiety, worry, then we're going to need long-term support as well as that immediate support to get to sleep. We want to be patient when we're using nervine tonics, talk about in a minute. And we want to assess and correct any underlying causes. And as home herbalists, we're not always going to know exactly what those underlying causes are. But as long as we can pick out enough signs and symptoms to point us to the need to maybe refer ourselves to a doctor or clinical herbalist or your practitioner of choice to assess those root causes while we're working on symptom control. So let's talk about understanding qualities and tissue states and sleep support. So the goal is first herbal action. So herbal actions are the things that herbs do. We're going to focus on 3 actions this evening. So nervine relaxants, or sometimes they're called sedatives. These are herbs that are relaxing and anxiolytic or anti-anxiety in small to moderate doses. And then herbs that are sedative in larger doses. This is the bulk of the herbs we would use to get ourselves to sleep. These are the rocks, or like the foundation stones of our herbal formula blending for sleep. Um, yeah, so many of these herbs have additional effects. Some help to relax with, physical relaxation as well as mental relaxation, digestive, relaxation, or calming, stress tummy. So we'll look at those secondary effects. We're also going to talk about nervine tonics. So nervine tonics tonify the nervous system's response to challenges. So it's building resiliency and increased flexibility and capacity for adaptation over time. So these aren't remedies that you necessarily take just when you're feeling stressed out or just when you can't sleep, although they will provide some calmness and some effect. These are the herbs that we take preventatively over the long term, when we're dealing with chronic illness, pain, stress in our daily lives. Insomnia, even without knowing the cause, is just in and of itself stressful. And that's why we want to talk about nervine tonics, even though they might not be the herbs that we're thinking of that are directly going to put us to sleep. These herbs work best when they're taken consistently, even when you're feeling good or you're having a good day. So the deepness, we're thinking about deep, penetrating deep into our bodies. The deepness of these actions doesn't start to become apparent until around 6 weeks of consistent use. And then I want to talk a little bit about antispasmodics. So herbs which directly support spasm in our bodies and also muscular tension. So some of these help smooth muscles, some of these help our skeletal muscles. But antispasmodics, when we're mentally tense, it's common, if you've ever seen anybody that's really worried, I do it. I'm like a T-Rex or something. It's like, I just feel that tension. Our shoulders are up. Lots of us that work on the computer a lot are going to have a lot of physical tension. And although we like to talk about mental health separate from physical health, our brains are in our bodies. So if we're mentally stressed, it's likely there's some type of physical tension. And if we're physically stressed, that is going to affect our mental state. And so thinking about antispasmodics or like relaxant herbs like that is important. All right. And so firstly, we want to think about herbal actions, those 3 herbal actions. After that, we want to also think about the qualities, which is, the Western way to think about herbal qualities is the 6 tissue states model. So when we work with herbs for sleep support, we primarily focus on those actions. We want to get ourselves to sleep, help with stress, make sure our physical muscles are relaxed enough to go to sleep. But those actions are also expressed through those qualities, through those tissue states, the direct experiential effects we can feel when we take an herb, those effects. So for instance, valerian is a warming herb, which we can feel and how it stimulates our circulation. It creates heat in the body. Oftentimes it makes your face feel a little warm. There is even some like musculoskeletal relaxing going on, especially like in the heart area. While hops, also an herb, 2 really popular herbs for sleep, valerian and hops. While hops has a cooling effect. It's bitter, it's cooling. And so generally herbs that are really hot or herbs that are really bitter can have a little bit of a drying effect, like valerian. Most of those herbs tend to be warming, though. And so understanding these temperature and moisture patterns help us match herbs more precisely to how someone experiences their sleep issues. So let's say that I'm in perimenopause and I'm having hot flashes. I'm also dealing with, with all those progesterone fluctuations and hormone fluctuations. I'm having trouble sleeping. What do you think would happen if I chugged a bunch of valerian tea or like took a bunch of tincture? Hot flash. It's a warming herb. You can feel that blood moving. That's going to do the opposite of getting me to sleep, even though in theory, it's a sedative herb, so if I take enough of it, maybe it would put me to sleep. Whereas hops, this cooling, sedating herb, would tone down those hot flashes and allow my body to relax and to get to sleep. So we want to think about these tissue states after we pick our categories, after we pick those herbal actions. Then we're going to make sure and choose herbs that are, people say energetically appropriate or qualitatively appropriate. Things aren't going to make us too hot, too cold, too dry. We don't want things that relax us too much. We don't want things to cause tension. excuse me, pardon me, I'm in the desert for 6 months and I'm usually, in a moist environment and I feel like I'm being desiccated. So the overall effects of herbs come from how these actions, those herbal actions, nervine relaxant sedatives, nervine tonics, antispasmodics. So how these actions and then those qualities work together. So thinking about the 6 tissue states in Western herbalism, that's what I'm trained in. So here's a good example. Passion flower, nervine relaxant, classic sedative that's excellent for racing thoughts, the monkey wheel, things where you're thinking through something and then you end up where you started. And then you're thinking through something again. It's neutral in temperature and moisture. So it's not going to dry anyone out. It's not going to cool them down too much or heat them up too much. And so its effects are not going to be very drastic in terms of the qualitative experience. So you're getting a very pure action there, a really pure sedative action. And so that combined with other herbs whose actions and qualities complement each other, like I said, if I am having hot flashes, maybe I would do passion flower and hops because it's, it would be net cooling because passion flower is so neutral. And that's why passion flower, it's very, very common for passion flower to be a base of a sleep formula because it pairs well with most other herbs. And it's very, it's very neutral. It's like a classic sedative. Right. So I want to talk just a little bit about key qualitative patterns in sleep disruption. I know I am moving through it really quickly. I just want to be able to get to the herbs so we can all have a good discussion together. So, a side note, sometimes we identify a qualitative pattern, so like a tissue state pattern, and the corresponding herbs don't seem to help. Let's say someone seems really cold, they feel, you see the cold signs. They're they have a difficulty getting warm at night, even with blankets, even if it's not cold out. The body's feeling heavy. Sleep is kind of shallow. Maybe they're pale. And you give them warming herbs, and you're like, what's going on? It's not working. I don't see this heat getting better. Thinking that there is sometimes an underlying pathology creating that pattern. For instance, anemia can show up as cold in the body. Thomas talks about it as a false cold. Because warming herbs won't help. So if you're choosing herbs, you've got your actions, you're choosing herbs based on the qualities that fit your body the best, and you're like, oh, I'm not warming up. Think to maybe potentially, some other things that could be behind those patterns. And I think that we can look at 3 types of patterns. So we can look at tension patterns in terms of sleep disruption. So when we're thinking of tension patterns, we're thinking of both tight muscles and restlessness. So body moving, kind of flinging around. That could also be caused from pain, but also physical tension can do that. When we're tense, it's hard to relax our muscles, and it's going to be really easy to get a spot that's sore and need and want to move around. We have mental tension, so racing thoughts, difficulty letting go of our thoughts, irritation, maybe even some anger about the lack of ability to sleep. So we're wanting when we're seeing this physical and mental tension, these patterns of physical and mental tension, we want to use sedative herbs that match the type and the depth of the tension. We'll talk about specific herbs to kind of look at those pattern examples. The heat and cold patterns, so on top of those herbal actions, we're going to look at heat signs. So feeling hot, irritated, restless, but restless and hot. Vivid dreams can often be hot. So a lot of people don't actually realize they're hot because they don't get to the point of sweating, but you're under the blankets. If you're feeling restless and you're not tense, assess your heat, take a layer off, take a blanket off, see if you're feeling better, because it often presents as restlessness. We think about those cold signs again that I talked about a few minutes ago, difficulty getting warm, the body feeling heavy, that shallow sleep, sluggishness. And so there we want warming herbs if you're seeing cold. So picking, nervine sedatives and tonics that are a little bit warming. And the same thing with those signs of heat. We're thinking more about hops or linden or some of these herbs that are a little on the cooling side. So dryness and dampness don't necessarily, they don't have a sleep related, um, a sleep related pattern. But I think it's always good to think about our dryness, or maybe our dampness turns into stagnation. So we're thinking of stagnation, dampness is kind of boggy, puffy, like maybe your eyes are kind of puffy. Your tongue might have scallops on it, and all that is teeth marks from it, being puffy. We're thinking about a lot of moisture, a lot of stagnation. Or we're thinking of dryness, which is most of us understand dryness. Our mouths are dry. It's that sensation. You're seeing dry skin, brittle hair. We're seeing the flaking skin. So anytime that you're formulating, you want to make sure that you're either choosing herbs that don't exacerbate the person's constitution of dryness and dampness, or you're giving additional herbs to the person to counteract that dryness. So maybe I want herbs that are drying because I need that sedative effect, and I need them in high doses. Maybe I'm also going to give someone a marshmallow tea or a linden tea or something that I know will counteract, maybe the valerian and the kava and those kind of warming sleep herbs. I'm going to talk about some assessment considerations and some underlying factors in insomnia and in sleeplessness. So if we don't know what we're dealing with, so if we don't know what the root cause is, and it's not stress, we won't be able to create effective formulas. So the best formula will only work if it's created with an understanding of why we can't sleep. If you have sleep apnea and you're waking up all night because of that, and you're getting broken sleep and you're not able to go back to sleep because of that, there might be herbs that can help ease you in and out of sleep, but you're not going to get good sleep and wake up being rested unless you address that root cause. Herbs can help, but they're not going to cure sleep apnea. And so we can create the most energetically, the most qualitatively effective formula with the correct herbal actions, and it won't work. Like for instance, if you have super low progesterone levels that are driving your insomnia, or you're taking SSRIs and it's not the right SSRI for you, herbs are only going to be able to do so much. So kind of understanding that fact is really important. And then we also want to think about our lived experience. So it's not just, I can't sleep. And this lived experience is really going to speak to the effects of those herbs, How do we feel? It's not just, I can't sleep. What does it feel like? Are you restless? Do you feel like your skin is crawling? Do you just lay there and wide awake no matter what you do? What metaphors can you use to describe your experience? Are you physically uncomfortable? Are you mentally active? Or maybe you're physically uncomfortable and you're mentally active. Doing a body scan. Are you in pain? Where are am I hot? Am I cold? Where am I tense? Do I need to get up and stretch? Do I need to take some magnesium? Do I need to take these herbs? Even how does the bedding feel against my skin is something that you can look at. In terms of that lived experience. And looking at what patterns we're seeing. So if we're thinking about those mental patterns, so racing thoughts, anxiety, whatever it is that's going on in your mind, assessing what's going on in our minds, maybe write that down. Assessing our physical patterns. Is there tension? Is there pain? What parts of the body are in pain? What does that pain feel like? Is it a hot pain? Is it a shooting pain? So just write it all down. Oftentimes we're having mixed patterns. Sometimes it's just anxiety. Sometimes you tweaked your back and you can't get comfortable. So your body's like, nope, it's not happening tonight. But what patterns are we seeing? Think about yourself, or maybe your kiddo or your friend or whoever, you're going to make this formula for. Write a little bit down. Save that for later when you're deciding on which specific herbs to pick. We also want to know, is there trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, or is it both? Oftentimes, falling asleep and staying asleep are two different things. Having trouble falling asleep is a little bit easier to support. Some of the things that make us wake up at night, or maybe wake up early, so we're not staying asleep, can potentially be pathological. Something like hypothyroidism, sleep apnea. So trouble falling asleep often relates to racing thoughts, physical tension, temperature regulation, stress and anxiety, caffeine use later in the day, noises, right? Is your dog barking? Is your puppy scratching? Is your baby keeping you up? Things like that, and also medication side effects. So that set of patterns requires herbs with more immediate sedative effects. If you can't go to sleep, you need to be able to ease your mind and body so you're able to sleep. If you're having trouble staying asleep, this can relate to, a ton of different things. Most common, blood sugar fluctuations, needing to pee for whatever reason, whether that's a medication, whether you have insulin resistance, diabetes, pain conditions, hormone imbalance, tons of different types of hormone imbalance, especially for folks with uteruses. Anxiety waking. So anxiety is something that can make us have trouble going to sleep. It can also affect staying asleep. And those are the dreams. I don't know if anyone else has had these dreams, but when I'm super anxious and I do fall asleep, my dreams are light and intense, and I'm like packing for the airport or digging through a pile of something to find something. So that kind of those vivid anxiety dreams. Also like maybe teeth grinding can point to potentially some anxiety. Alcohol use. So alcohol can knock us out in the short term, but it's terrible for sleep. Even a little bit in someone that has insomnia can cause nighttime waking. And so this state requires herbs with more sustained effects, so potentially those nervine tonics, deeper support in addition to those sedatives. It also needs assessment of those underlying pathologies. But there are a few things that you can try while you're working on root causes. And this is where you might need to see a clinical herbalist or a sleep doctor, or your preferred well-trained practitioner that's trained in the assessment of pathology. Another question we want to ask ourselves, are there daytime experiences affecting sleep? And those are going to overlap a little bit with some of the other things we've talked about. But this is where we want to look at our energy level throughout the day. When do we have the most energy? When do we have the least energy? Not just our stress, but our patterns of stress. How is stress presenting throughout your day? And what does that feel like in your body? Are you in pain throughout the day? Are you not in pain until the evening? Does your pain slowly ramp up all day and come to a pinnacle at night, allowing you to not sleep? How is your mood, your appetite, your digestion? So just kind of thinking about patterns throughout your day and if any of those could potentially affect your sleep. And some lifestyle stuff. We really talked about this, most of this, but work schedule. Folks that work an odd schedule, our bodies really like to, we have this circadian rhythm, and our bodies really like to be on a schedule with sleep. A lot of us, for a lot of different reasons, can't have that. Maybe you do shift work. Maybe you work till 2 a.m. one day, and then the next day or 2 days later, you're waking up at 6 a.m. and to go into work. That's going to affect our ability to sleep and point to the need not just for herbs, but for a very rigorous sleep hygiene within those different hours to teach our bodies that, oh, maybe we're going to sleep at a different time, but these are the things that we do while we're sleeping, creating some, rituals with those herbs, or some practices with taking your herbs every night to give your body that little oomph to know it's time to go to bed. Lack of exercise or exercising too vigorously, too close to bedtime can cause insomnia. I have seen not all of us can exercise, or they can exercise in a way that helps with sleep. But if you are, physically able, when your physical body is tired, it's a lot easier to go to sleep. That, brings up endorphins. It helps with pain. It helps with mental stress and anxiety. So not an herb, but pretty important. Not just alcohol and caffeine, but other substances, other drugs are going to affect sleep patterns and kind of poor sleep hygiene in general. We have a very detailed handout for you guys on sleep hygiene. We don't have time to go into super detail in the class, but overall, key points. Do the best you can to wake up and go to sleep at similar times, as much as you possibly can. You want to avoid computers, TVs, cell phones an hour before bed. Um, we always tell folks that go to bed between 10 and midnight, to maybe don't have caffeine after noon, after 1 o'clock. If your sleep schedule is different, thinking about a certain amount of hours, you want a good gap, especially if you're sensitive. And it's always useful, even if you don't think you're sensitive, to try only doing caffeine early in the day, for a week, to see if that affects your ability to sleep. It's nice to turn off overhead and bright lights. It's not like everybody needs to have candles on. It's just we have these big, like I'm renting an apartment right now, so we have these big overhead fluorescent, like bright lights, not conducive to sleep. If you have little lamps, turn on the little lamps instead. That can be really helpful. So just doing whatever you can to teach your body it's getting closer to bedtime. Relaxing rituals. These don't have to be spiritual rituals. We're thinking of ritual as habitual, these habits. Anything from a shower, meditation, making a cup of tea, making a ashwagandha milk decoction, some tasty things. So thinking about creating a ritual or a set of habits that feel really good to you before bed. And I always tell folks, do your doom scrolling about, the state of the world, anything that you're worried about, all your social media before dinner, and do the best you can to let that go until, the next day. Ideally, of course, we all wouldn't be doing much of that, but harm reduction being you get until dinner. After dinner, it's focusing on, relaxation. So a quick couple minutes to talk about understanding underlying factors and root causes. If you think you or, if one of your family members or friends are dealing with one of the issues that I'm talking about, refer to, like I said earlier, a qualified clinical herbalist, a doctor, just a practitioner that's well trained. You're always welcome to email us if you are having trouble sleeping and you're struggling with it yourself. We're happy to get you in at the free clinic. Thomas and I also have a private practice, and we can refer you to folks in your area if you prefer in person. Most areas, not all, have clinical herbalists. The American Herbalist Guild has a list of registered herbalists on their website. I'm pretty sure it's by state. So if you're not into the online, seeing a practitioner online, we can get you set up with someone somewhere else. So this isn't a comprehensive list. This is just some common things that I see in my practice. Restless legs. So this is different than restlessness from being hot, or restlessness from anxious thoughts. So restless legs are like a fidgety, like almost icky feeling in your legs. The need to move or wiggle. You might start to fall asleep and then and get that kind of ick, wiggly, crawly feeling in your legs. This can be caused by iron deficiency anemia, low magnesium. It's common in diabetes, especially in advanced stages of diabetes where there's some nerve damage in the extremities. SSRIs in higher doses can cause restless legs. So anything that affects serotonin. So trazodone, which is really a popular drug for sleep. If sometimes when folks take too much, that can cause restless legs. Peripheral neuropathy for other reasons other than diabetes, dopamine imbalances, and then caffeine. High caffeine and sensitive folks and alcohol use can cause some restless legs. That pattern wouldn't be an every night pattern. It would be when you could connect it to, the substance use. Sleep apnea is more common than folks think. Some symptoms of sleep apnea: headaches in the AM, dry mouth in the AM, snoring, waking up gasping, that nighttime waking, daytime fatigue, waking up not feeling rested, even with adequate hours of sleep. This requires medical evaluation. Herbs can support, and so some like practices can support, but not replace treatment. And noting with the pathologies that I'm talking about, having one thing. So if you wake up with a dry mouth, but you're not having all of those other symptoms, it might just be that you're sleeping with your mouth open. So don't necessarily start to get worried if you're having one symptoms, right? When we have a pathology, it's a constellation of symptoms that fit together. We talked about anxiety and anxiety disorders that present with physical tension, racing thoughts, chest tightness. I talked about jaw clenching, jaw grinding, and difficulty relaxing. So that would need both acute and long-time support. So support during the day, over the long term, as well as additional sleep support. Depression can cause early waking, cause you to wake up way, way earlier than you need to. That also can cause fatigue. Chronic pain, of course, is a little easier to assess if you're in pain, and that's likely causing it. So hormone imbalances of all kinds, low progesterone, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, perimenopause and menopause, so as well as cortisol issues, so PTSD, CPTSD, melatonin, thyroid imbalances can all cause issues with sleep. And then sometimes there are digestive issues affecting sleep. Most of the time you're going to know about that if you have to wake up to go to the bathroom. Also sometimes timing of meals. It's really popular right now to not eat dinner because the most recent studies are showing that intermittent fasting can be really useful for dinner, but it's also very difficult to go to bed when you're hungry and to fall asleep when you're hungry. Medications also impact sleep. SSRIs can cause activation, wakefulness, and very vivid dreams. So we're thinking of activation in terms of you were really tired until you laid down, and now you're just like, oh, I feel normal. I could carry on a normal conversation. You're still activated. You haven't, cycled through. ADHD medications can make it hard to wind down those stimulants. Beta blockers can affect kind of sleep-wake cycles. Steroids cause that similar activation, awakeness, and insomnia. A lot of things that when I see people on long-term steroids, it's like they want to keep their eyes open. My body's so tired, but my mind is awake, and it's like your eyes just float open. So that's pretty common. Opiates and some other pain medications can disrupt sleep cycles as well. So we're going to talk about herbs just a minute. I'm going to talk about a couple of consideration in terms of herb selection and preparation. Talked about in the beginning, it's really important that we choose the right herbs for the situation, but it's just as important how we prepare and dose those herbs. Thinking back to that ashwagandha example, that sometimes if you're just taking the tincture and you're trying to do that, take ashwagandha for long-term stress management and, nighttime waking and things like that, the tincture is not going to, you can't take enough tincture to get that effect. You need to take, capsules or honey paste or just throw back the powder in order to get that higher dosage. Thomas's book is a good reference for preparation methods. Most herbs, but not all herbs, if you don't have other books. So we're wanting to think about constituent solubility. In what form does this herb shine? Thinking about something like wood betony, which works way better as a tea than it does as a tincture. It still works, but it doesn't shine as a tincture. That's the same thing as ashwagandha. Whereas milky oats, one of these really beautiful, gentle, nourishing, nervine tonics that you take long term to help with stress and anxiety, it needs the constituents, that milky sap, it's alcohol soluble. So milky oat tops as a tea are moistening, nourishing, and gently calming, but that tea is not going to have that same effect as milky oats tincture. And then we're thinking about the speed of action. So tinctures and glycerites are going to be faster than teas to take. So something that if you want something for your bedside that you can take right before bed and then potentially wake up and take, thinking about making a tincture or a glycerite, so an extract. Tea is really wonderful for our bedtime rituals. And I feel like it can get deeper and help us relax really deeply. But that also, another consideration with tea, other than that you have to prepare it, is peeing. So if you have an issue waking up to pee a lot, then maybe tea isn't the best form for you in the evening. Thinking about capsules, they're easy to take, but you have to think about taking them 30 to 45 minutes, maybe even an hour, depending on when you had your last meal, before you want to fall asleep. You take them right into bed, you might be up for a while. So we want our formulas to be in a form that is accessible in the moment. So we think about taste and compliance. Make sure you take, not all tinctures are going to taste good. We could put them in a little juice, a little water if the taste is bad, but for taste sensitive folks, sometimes they just can't do it. So making sure, kiddos are like that. It's really hard for kiddos to take really bitter things. Their taste buds are still growing and being pruned. So they taste things, I think, a lot more strongly than some adults do. And the duration of action needed. So tea is going to penetrate really deeply and get us sleepy, but it might wear off more quickly than a capsule. I think we talked about that, capsules. And so formula basics. So we're going to do a really easy kind of 3-part formula creation. And so after I talk about the herbs, when I ask folks to throw out a scenario, we're going to pick a base formula structure. And so we're going to do a primary herb. So first step, we're going to pick a primary herb. We're going to think of an herb that matches that main sleep disruption pattern. That's the appropriate strength for that individual, considering the onset needed. So maybe with racing thoughts, that would be passion flower. And so we'll talk about that. And so we have our primary herb. We have one herb. That's the base. That's that foundation block. Generally, we're picking that herb's going to have a bigger part in the formula than our supporting herbs. Thinking about supporting herbs. So that's 2. 1 primary herb, 2 additional supporting herbs. It's good when you start to make formulas with less herbs. And so maybe saying like 1 to 2 supporting herbs to start, just to keep things simple while you're playing with formulation. So supporting herbs might address a secondary pattern. Maybe someone has racing thoughts, but they also, I had to think about something off the top of my head. They also have sensory sensitivity, and that teeny bit of light feels like it's just punching them in the eye, or something like that. And so maybe we want to put some skullcap with our passion flower to help tone the knob down on that kind of overstimulated sensory. So it might not be skullcap alone, might not get us to sleep, but skullcap, using that skullcap to turn down that sensory overload, along with a sedative like passion flower, can work really well. We want them to complement the primary herbs. So we don't want herbs. If someone's super dry, we're not going to want to use all hot drying herbs. That's not a balanced formula. We want their formulas to be as balanced as possible. And then the third set of herbs, so we have 1 primary herb, 1 to 2 supporting herbs, and maybe we want another herb for specific targeted support. So we're thinking about pain. Maybe you need some corydalis to help with pain, or some Jamaican dogwood to put in there to help with pain. Maybe you need a musculoskeletal relaxant like lobelia, or maybe some kava fluid extract. Kava is really great in folks that don't drink a lot of alcohol. Thomas and I really like the fluid extracts, really strong, because it helps with anxiety. It's sedative in high doses. Not sedative in low doses, sedative in high doses, and it's a really great musculoskeletal relaxant. So our third category, targeted support as needed for our presentation. Maybe what's going on when we can't sleep. And always remembering safety considerations. If you're on medications, make sure that those herbs aren't going to affect your medications. You can start with lower doses and work your way up, and kind of well, have a journal about your exploration with herbs. So monitor your response. Okay, I took this passion flower kava skullcap and it worked, but I still didn't get to sleep as fast as I wanted. I'm still feeling really tense. And then you can tweak your formulas that way. Adjust formulas based on those effects. So those herbal actions, we have our qualities, and then effects are what we feel in our bodies based on those herbal actions. So adjusting our formulas when we want different effects, and know when to refer out. All right. So let's talk about some herbs. I think we talked quite a bit about passion flower, about those circular thinking, those racing thoughts. I just gave a really great example of an herbal pairing that works really well. The passion flower and skullcap pairs beautifully well for sensory overstimulation and that mental tension. Passion flower is super safe. It can be used acutely. It can be used over time. You can take quite a bit of it. You can even take like up to a teaspoon without it causing harm. It's, a lot of alcohol. You can make it as a glycerite. You can make it as a tincture. And I personally think that skullcap or passion flower also works excellently as a tea, with the caveat that it has to be good, freshly dried passion flower. If you get some super old kind of brown passion flower, it's not going to work. I think it's excellent. Thomas really likes it for a sleep tea too. So passion flower is one of those herbs that can shine as long as you have good quality passion flower as a tea or a tincture. If you're looking for that quick action, you can pick the tincture. And we talked about neutral in temperature and moisture. Yeah. And you can start with a dose of 1 ml. I almost never give that little of a dose, but you can start with that. Or if you're giving it to like a kiddo or a teenager, and then go up to a teaspoon. Skullcap helps with that sensory overwhelm with nervous tension. It's great when the lights and sounds feel too intense, like sensory overload. It's good for the wired and tired sort of feeling. So if you feel like you've been at a mall at Christmas time, or like you've been trying to buy something on Black Friday, it's like that kind of feeling where you're just like, oh, nobody touch me, nobody look at me, put me in a dark cabinet for an hour. Skullcap is excellent for that sort of feeling. The fresh tincture it needs to be a fresh tincture to be a tonic. So skullcap is an herb that you can take long term in higher doses over time to build that nervous system resiliency. But that doesn't mean that skullcap doesn't work dried. So that's where that kind of nuance with herbs come in. Dried skullcap in tea form and in tincture form is still an excellent sedative. And so the fresh tincture is going to deal with kind of those specific indications that I was talking about, build resiliency over time. And the dried tincture, or dried as a tea, it's going to still cause sedation. And it can be pretty strong as a sedative. It's worth trying. And so as a sedative, so if we're doing the dried tincture, you want maybe 1 to 3 mils if it's going to be alone, and you to do closer to the 3 mils if you're doing it alone, and you can kind of ease the dosage back if you're pairing it with other herbs. So 1 to 3 mils is kind of tonifying, right? It's helping to support that nervous system response. 2 to 5 mils of that dried tincture is going to be sedative. And you're getting to a teaspoon of skullcap, and that you're going to get that sedating effect as well as the nervous system resiliency. Again, needs to be tinctured fresh. Valerian. Valerian is an amazing herb. Some people get paradoxical effects. So like for instance, me, I take valerian, I literally won't sleep all night. It happened last year. I needed glasses and didn't have them. And I got this herbal formula that was in a bottle. This is some like extract capsules. I didn't know it had valerian, and I didn't sleep for a day and a half, 2 days. And then I realized that it was valerian, which doesn't mean that it shouldn't be tried. It's a great sedative. It's a strong sedative, and it's really great for folks that have those cold signs. So sleeping, that like hard to get warm when you're in bed. Warming herbs also can help release some of that physical tension. And start with 3 to 4 mils. That's a pretty strong dose. But if we're trying to get to sleep, if you're trying it by itself. Hops, I always like to talk about after valerian. I think that hops, because it's cooling, so it's a stronger sedative. Hops is also good for nervous stomach. Hops are very bitter. And so we're thinking about if you have digestive issues, you might want to not take too much hops before bed. So if you are prone to diarrhea or IBS symptoms, be careful with your dosage. You can start with two or 3 mils of the hops, so 2 or 3 droppers. Hops is really it's wonderful for those heat signs and folks with nervous stomachs. Thinking about beer and hoppy beer and how that makes you feel, I really like it for folks that can't sit down and they're like exhausted, but they're like, oh, let me fiddle. I like fiddle with this bottle. Oh, I forgot to throw this away. And then all of a sudden an hour has gone by and you're not sleeping and you're even more exhausted. So that works really well for that. Chamomile. Chamomile is gentle but effective, right? And so I think that chamomile gets put to the side because folks think that gentle means weak, and it isn't. For using chamomile for a person that it fits the kind of specific indications for can be very, very intense. I think that a lot of folks that try chamomile are doing tea bags from the store, but a strong infusion of chamomile is going to be pretty sedative. It's good for tension in the gut and nervous stomach. So if you're someone that's anxious, that has that keeps that in your stomach, that can be a really, really good herb for that. Thomas says whiny babies of all ages. And I like to think, in addition to that, for folks who have a difficult time coping with day-to-day life stressors due to like a lack of developed coping skills. And I like to pair it with skullcap for those sensory issues, or blue vervain if folks are quick to get angry when they have day-to-day life stressors that they feel like they can't cope with. It shines as a tea. Tincture works, but it's best as a tea. And so this herb is aromatic and bitter. It's warming, but not super warming. So it's not going to cause like an overt heating. Yeah, and I think it's an underutilized antispasmodic with an affinity to the gut. So that IBS, that mental tension, that nervous stomach on top of that. Linden. So linden, we're moving through some of these like sweet, gentle, deep remedies. So linden is an excellent herb for relaxation. It's cooling and moistening. helps with emotional tension and softening. So allowing us to see the spaces between the leaves. That's kind of the metaphor that I like to use, right? So if we are tense and anxious, our focus is more one pointed. That's how our sympathetic nervous system works, right? We're focusing on the task at hand. And I think that linden can take that like sensory situation and open it and let us see the space between the leaves, see the small things, enjoy the small things, soften. So it's really great. It shines as a tea. Although a strong glycerite also works. Prefer it as a glycerite. I don't prefer most herbs as a glycerite, but I think that linden as a glycerite can be really nice. It's great as a before bed blend to kind of bring enjoyment and ease to your evening routine. That's softening. That's drink some linden tea with honey and turn over your overhead lights and just see the space between the leaves. So this is a gentle sedative. It's not going to be super strong. It's not going to knock you over the head like valerian or hops or even, a higher dose of passion flower, but it tastes delicious. And even people newer to herbs can have this. And I think that for kids and younger folks, kids, tweens, doing a chamomile linden tea can be a really wonderful, gentle but effective combination. Let's talk about lemon balm. So lemon balm, most of us know lemon balm as an herb that's more for anxiety and for maybe even depression because it's uplifting while it's relaxing us. It has those really beautiful aromatics, but it's also one of the few aromatic herbs that is cooling. And so it's uplifting. It's taking off the heaviness, kind of that heaviness of the day. It's good for stress and depression with mild anxiety. It's another super safe herb. Works well as a tea, a glycerite, or a tincture or a capsule. On top of, the things that we know about lemon balm, that's like bringing the gladness, easing depression. It can calm, even calm mania. It has been pretty well studied to help with sleep. And since it works in a lot of different forms, it's useful as a kind of a secondary herb, right? So we're thinking about those primary herbs. By generally thinking of lemon balm, not always, sometimes it's a primary herb if it fits the picture really well. But thinking of lemon balm as a secondary herb for someone that maybe needs to bring some lightness to their evening and that needs to, take away the heaviness of that day in order to lay down and be able to rest. And like I said, it's also just delicious in tincture, tea, glycerite. All right. So let's talk about some nervine tonics. And I know it's 5 o'clock, so if you have to leave and only plan for an hour, totally fine. This is being recorded, and Tiffany will put the recording up in the classroom in a couple of days. And for those of you that are leaving us at 5, thank you so much for coming. For those of us that know the eclectic school, Thomas and I can be pretty wordy. And so we do often go a little bit over in our classes. So let's go over some nervine tonics. These build resiliency and support nervous system health over time. And that's often needed if one of the main causes of sleep is that you're anxious, that you're worried, nervous, angry, if you're stressed out at all. We're going to think about not just adding nervine tonics to our sleep blends, but to using nervine tonics throughout the day as needed. My favorites are milky oats. We talked about that. I brought that up a little bit when we were talking about moistening and preparation. It's deep nervous system restoration. Needs to be tinctured fresh for the best results. It takes time to show the effects. So if you're really stressed out and you take some milky oats, you might not necessarily notice, even if your body's shifting, you might not notice that shift because it does deep work and it does that over time. It's an excellent base for nervous system formulas. is it's gentle, it's moistening. It combines well with every other nervine. I can't, someone's going to prove me wrong for saying that, but I can't really think of a nervine herb, an herb for nervous system support that it wouldn't play well with, which is pretty, passion flower plays well with most things. But besides that, there aren't a lot of herbs that, play well with everyone else. I like milky oats with mental and physical exhaustion and burnout, who are irritable but kind of lack focus and maybe even feel a little bit hopeless about recovering from their burnout or maybe their chronic illness. So that feeling of just like, I'm burned out and I need to lay on a hammock for a week and I see no end in sight. And that where it's almost like exhaustion and acceptance of the burnout, and plodding along. Uh, and we like it. The dose is 2 to 5 milliliters. So if you're taking this as a single herb for nervous system resiliency, I would say, a teaspoon a few times a day. So you're taking a lot of this herb. In terms of sleep, if you're thinking about supporting your sleep, your stress, and your sleep, the sleeplessness with irritability, maybe not like hot anger, just kind of like, this pillow, my hair, like little things irritating you that you can't just like relax into sleep. Holy basil. So holy basil can help with sleep. It supports stress adaptation. You can take it during the day and at night. So this is not an herb that's going to knock you out. This is an herb that's going to feel really good and relaxing in your body. I think it's wonderful in a nervous system support formula. It is a tonic nervine you can take over time. It's delicious. So it's another really excellent base. It is aromatic, so it is warming, but it's very mildly warming. And I think that it can help with mental clarity during the day. And if we have mental clarity during the day, we don't have to use as much energy, and our nervous systems won't be as keyed up by the time we get to bed. And keyed up nervous systems are like the bane of falling asleep. It works well as a tea, tincture, or capsule. So you can use it in any form. It's uplifting and it's also carminative. So if you have gas or bloating after meals that you can feel, before you go to bed, holy basil tea is a really wonderful thing to maybe have after dinner. Its aromatic compounds can relax the lower esophageal sphincter. So we do like to tell folks to avoid this in the evening if you have reflux or if you have GERD, because it might make it worse in the evening. Probably okay if it's mild to have it to test it out during the day, but you don't want to do it right before bed. Another herb that is also that I didn't mention in sedatives that is sedative is catnip. Catnip is tasty as a tea. I know it smells a little funny when it's fresh, but it dries down. It's just this wonderfully kind of aromatic, like gentle mint. It can be really helpful as a tincture and as a tea. It's wonderful as a tea for sleep. It's really great as a tincture for that same sort of thing I was talking about with holy basil. It actually works better for gas and for bloating. And so we think to add some catnip maybe as a secondary herb in folks that have, digestive issues, that have gas and bloating or holding tension in their GI systems, in addition to not being able to sleep. We're thinking of Damiana. So Damiana is a nervine tonic that's uplifting, it's restorative. It's really, really good for depression that affects sleep. It also, in higher doses, is a sedative. So it's one of those herbs that, as a tea and in moderate doses will build resiliency over time. In larger doses, it is going to help with sedation. This is traditionally indicated for folks, for people who stress kills their sex drive. They don't like folks that don't like to be in their bodies. We don't want to pigeonhole as an aphrodisiac. It's a very relaxing herb. It can relax physical tension as well. It can make you feel cuddly. And even if you're not cuddling with a person, that feeling of like cuddliness can make us fall asleep easier. Maybe we bound the pillows up, or maybe we just snuggle in to fluff our pillows and snuggle in. It can make us feel more snuggly and more comfortable in our bed. So using that as a secondary herb, and excuse me, sometimes even as a primary kind of base herb in formulas that are in, or well indicated in those higher doses. This remedy is also mildly bitter. It's aromatic, and it is even useful as you can even smoke it. And it's pretty common to smoke aphrodisiacs, or to smoke aphrodisiacs, to smoke Damiana. And so if you are a smoker, then, and you like to smoke things, that can be something that's really nice. I prefer it, and I know Thomas prefers it as a tea in parts. So not just Damiana, because it is a little bit bitter, but mixed with maybe like passion flower, or passion flower and linden. That would be really nice. I feel like it engages the senses more when you do it as a tea, but the tincture works. The tincture also works well as a sedative. Ashwagandha. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jennifer has her hand raised.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, hi there.
Hi.
Hi. For Damiana, I was wondering about contraindications, like what sorts of people or conditions would this herb be contraindicated for? Because I'm one of those people, it acts very counter on me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of those people, I can't take SSRIs and I can't take St. John's wort, and Damiana affected me in a very similar way. It made me very itchy, very irritable, very
Mm-hmm.
the bitch. And we're talking like just 2 squirts of tincture, like in the morning, will just wreck my entire rest of my day. So I've
Mm-hmm.
learned that that's one that I need to stay away from. I don't know why I need to stay away from it. So I was just wondering if you had, I don't know, any experience to share with it. Because I'm also like, I have been a little wary about like trying things like ashwagandha and whatnot, because I don't know if that's going to have a paradoxical effect on
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yeah, so
That's my
I see.
question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing your question. So I think that I see paradoxical reactions to nervines in general in a few different ways. So folks that feel hypervigilant, whether that's because of trauma or just super keyed up in stressful jobs, um, tend to get those paradoxical reactions. That isn't so much about the herb, it's about your brain, right? And so without going into too much detail, folks that are hypervigilant and that have like serious chronic stress, PTSD, things like that, your brain has these responses to protect you, right? So your brain says it's energetically efficient to stick you in hypervigilance because that's what you need to be, because you're showing me that the world isn't safe, or you're showing me that you're going to be stressed all the time. So it's, and it costs a lot of energy for our brains to run. It eats up so much glucose. It's very, our brains are very hungry, and so they automate everything. And so if an herb, if you put a calming herb that is, and Damiana is a really sensual herb, so we don't want to pigeonhole it as an aphrodisiac, but it is an herb that will bring you into your body. But it can bring you into your body quickly and make you feel a lot of sensory things at once if you're not used to being in your body, or you're used to being like pretty stressed out all the time. I feel like you can have that paradoxical response because your brain is like, no, we need to stay here. I'm going to fight harder. I'm going to fight harder to keep you here. And so that's when like using drop doses or using like somatic practices can be really useful. Like thinking about priming an herb. So only taking it when you're feeling really good and taking just little bits to teach your brain, like, oh, Damiana equals good, or whatever herb it is that you want to take equals good. You do that for a few weeks or a month, and then generally that paradoxical reaction can be overcome. That being said, if there are other nervines that work, not necessarily a need to do that, but I would say a Damiana, it if it's triggering, it's either because of that or because it is very sensory. So if you're used to like if you're a floaty person and whether that's from PTSD or you're just naturally that constitution, it might bring you into your body that quickly, might just feel really uncomfortable or shocking. You're like, oh, what's going on? All of a sudden, like, this is uncomfortable and I'm itchy and I'm uncomfortable. That was kind of wordy. I hope I answered your question.
No, that's actually really helpful because well, I have a special interest in neuroscience, so I tend to think of things kind of more through that lens. But this idea that, everything's in balance and some things are more stimulating and some things are more sedating. I've
Mm-hmm.
definitely noticed for me, I don't do well with stimulating substances. So like caffeine
Mm-hmm.
or Adderall or SSRIs or Damiana or whatever, I feel like or Strattera, which I've been prescribed when I'm too scared to take it, because I feel
Mm-hmm.
like anything that's going to be shifting me like more into the front of my brain, more into like that stress state rather than that
Mm-hmm.
parasympathetic state is amping me up too much.
Mm-hmm.
So from what you were describing, it sounds like Damiana certainly falls more within like the stimulating substances. And I do
Mm-hmm.
better with, the blue vervains and the skull caps and
Mm-hmm.
muscimol.
Well, it's also
Amanita
very
is my favorite thing.
aromatic. So I wouldn't say that Damiana is stimulating, but it's sedating, and I feel like it's sedating in an awareness sort of way, if that makes sense.
I guess I'm thinking like
Um,
energetically kind of stimulating.
mhm,
Um, I like the way that my brain kind of like has this itchy quality to it. Just feels very glutamatergic to me. So
mhm,
it just feels like it's like just stimulating like a lot of high energy, like right here
definitely.
in my temporal lobes.
Mhm.
So, okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
bodies. Oh, you're welcome. Now that I'm out of my notes, I'm going to answer some of these questions I see. Let's see. Let's see. So California poppy, it is technically sedating. I am not impressed. I'm not impressed with it for sleep. I know that Thomas doesn't use it very often either. I mean, I think that it is in the opiate family, or it is in the poppy family. It is not, addictive. It binds weakly to those opiate receptors. It's not an opiate. And I think a select few people find it sedating. I worked with it for so many years when I did my initial training on the West Coast, and I would harvest it fresh. I tried a ton of different preparations, so I can't speak to it much because I've just never had any luck with it, and I don't really have specific indications because it never worked for enough people. I think that it is a more cooling herb, so thinking about it for like that is hotter constitutions, and you're probably going to need a high dose of it. So I would say starting at 3 mils, and just play with it. I've heard holy basil is another one that can bring you into your body quickly. I would say that that is true. I think that it's a little different than Damiana because it has more of those uplifting aromatics and less bitterness. So that Damiana is aromatic and bitter, and I think that that bitterness can bring us into our body. Because it's turning your digestion on. It's those receptors, those receptors in your digestive system. Whereas holy basil is more uplifting, right? So the energy of holy basil it's like moving that kind of tension through aromatics to allow your body to then relax. But that initial feeling of or of holy basil is like moving up and out, and then it kind of sedates and brings relaxation. Uh, Brings blood flow quickly to the brain as a strong tea. Oh, could be. Yep, could be. Okay, let's keep on going. Got a couple more herbs and then we can play with formulating. Ashwagandha. And so there are a handful of folks that have paradoxical reactions to ashwagandha. Some of those folks, it's in capsules that are extracts, like concentrated extracts as opposed to powder. Some people, even with the powder, will have paradoxical responses. It's not as common as valerian, but it does happen occasionally. I've seen a handful of folks over the years that this happens for. But for a lot of people, ashwagandha is really amazing because it's one of our herbs that can not just help with like it's a tonic, right? So it's gentle, it's It's contraindicated in like soup with super dry folks. So if you're really, really dry, because you have to take a lot of it for it to work. And so being careful to not dry yourself out too much. Besides that, it's worth a try for a lot of folks. It is not going to help you fall asleep so much. It will help build resiliency over time. So it is one of those, it's our main calming adaptogen in the Western Materia Medica. That's been brought into the Western Materia Medica. It is not a Western herb. It's, an Ayurvedic herb, but it's very common in our Materia Medica now. And so it's useful because it can help build that resiliency to stress over time. And because it, works in an adaptogenic way, it is really helpful for nighttime waking and to get deeper sleep. And so the dosage of ashwagandha for nervous system resiliency and to work on that nighttime waking is going to be 1,000 milligrams at least twice a day, and that's the starting dose. So in a standard capsule, that's generally going to look like 2 capsules twice a day, and you want to do a 2 capsules in the afternoon and then sometime after dinner. So you don't need to take it right before bed because it's kind of just working. It'll give you some gentle relaxation after dinner that can move you into that sleep, and that's going to take although you might feel some calming, it's going to take about 6 weeks for you to see the full effect of that if you are waking up a lot at night. I like to give it a lot in perimenopause and menopause, but that doesn't mean that it's pigeonholed as like a woman's herb, and it really isn't at all. It isn't. It's just as useful it's useful for all genders and spectrums. It is specifically really good for hypothyroidism. It's one of our only herbs that can affect the thyroid in that way. So for hypothyroidism and kind of the sleep issues that comes with that, the depression that comes with that. Which is more common in AFAB women, but is still present in other folks as well. Oh, motherwort. Yeah, we'll talk about motherwort in just a couple minutes. Yeah, so ashwagandha, deep restoration. It's great for anxiety. It helps maintain sleep and get into those deeper sleeps. And it's really also delicious decocted into like a warm milk. So there's like tons of folks that are on the golden milk train. I'm on the like yummy ashwagandha train, right? So milk of choice, a half a teaspoon is about 1,000 milligrams, depending on how finely milled your powder is. Put a little honey in it and whatever, if you like chocolate or if you like, decaf chai spices, things like that. But thinking about making like a delicious milky decoction before bed and kind of having that, or like after dinner and having that as a treat and like an easing yourself into sleep. It's pretty balanced. Like I said, it can dry out the most dry folks, but you're not going to worry too much for the average person. It potentially helps with low testosterone in both, in all the gender spectrum. These are early studies, so we can't say for sure, but it seems to so far, and we'll keep our eyes out for that. I think that it works just deeply on the HPA axis. I think it's really hard to quantify what happens, but I've seen it work really well for people with all sorts of hormonal issues. And I don't think it's directly pushing the hormones. I think it's nourishing, kind of that stress system. And when we're not as stressed, our bodies can kind of kick back in and do the work that they need to do. Kava. So I mentioned kava before. I want to talk a little bit more deeply about kava, and then we'll talk about motherwort. So kava is a pretty powerful musculoskeletal relaxant. It's topically useful, and as an oil, as well as internally. It helps with mental tension. And we know that, it helps with social anxiety, stage fright, things that, connection with partners. So thinking about it as an herb, an herb of connection. It works pretty quickly. So it's a fast acting herb. It works best as a tincture, or, you can knead it, right? And so they're not, the cavolactones are not soluble in water, but they are, you can agitate them out of the kava. And so that was in traditional Polynesian cultures, they would chew and spit it, and that would get, that mechanical action would get the cavolactones out. You can smush it, put it in cheesecloth and smush it. You can smush it underwater in a bath. You can also do that. And then you can kind of rub it on like a little knob. You can also drink it that way. I tell folks large doses, so small doses of this herb are it's not stimulating, but it's more like drinking a little bit of alcohol, or it has sort of like a mood shifting effect. But in higher doses, it is sedative, and large doses will knock you out. Absolutely. Thomas and I use fluid extract. It's a really common secondary herb in formulas for folks with a lot of physical tension. I use it in a lot of sleep formulas. And as long as someone isn't drinking doesn't drink alcohol super frequently, because it's not really good for the liver to pair the two. We want to select noble kava cultivars and avoid the 2D kava for internal use. So just make sure when you're making your preparations that it's a noble kava. Any kava is useful topically, so as an oil in a bath, but it like as a topical muscle relaxer. So we prefer the fluid extract at 1 to 4 mils as needed. How to make a fluid extract is in Thomas's book. If you'd like to learn how to make one, I don't obviously have time to talk about that now, but if you email the school, we'll get you a recipe out, or actually we will put up a recipe for a fluid extract in the free classroom so that you can access that. And with a standard tincture, so fluid extract 1 to 4 mils, 1 to 4-ish droppers can be needed to get the sedative effect. But with a standard tincture, you might need, even up to like 10 milligrams if you're doing it on its own, which is a lot. That's like a couple teaspoons, but it will knock you out. So I tell folks, we'll put the fluid extract in formulation, but a last ditch, you really need to get to sleep. A couple teaspoons of kava and some water might just get you there. So more of like an emergency, not an emergency, but more of like a I need it now sort of herb. Yeah, so we're thinking about motherwort. Motherwort is classic for anxiety and for heart palpitations. So an anxiety or a sleeplessness that comes with that like fluttery heart palpating sort of situation. It is very bitter. It is very cooling because of that bitterness. It doesn't taste super nice. Even folks that like bitter, like it's on the bitter end of the spectrum. And so I also think that it's got a pushy mothering vibe, motherwort. It's got kind of that pushy vibe that on its own can be unpleasant for some folks. And so I never use motherwort on its own, but it is useful as a secondary herb for folks that are having like those heart palpitations or that kind of fluttery feeling, even if it's not. Like I've seen folks that think they're having heart palpitations, get a heart monitor put in, they push the button, and every time they push the button, the doctor's like, nope, nothing was happening to your heart. But it's still that kind of fluttery trunk, like upper chest trunk tension. So motherwort's really, really good for that. 1 to 2 mils is really all you need. That being said, there are some folks that just like love it, right? Some folks that like kind of need that mothering vibe and kind of like it, like they like to be told the way it is. If that makes sense, like just tell me what to do. Like I'm so anxious and floaty, just tell me what to do. Those folks will just drink it up, right? That's maybe up to even 3 mils. I wouldn't go higher than 3 mils of motherwort because it might, because of the bitterness, it might make you feel a little bit nauseous. Yeah, so that's motherwort. It's not really super sedative, but I also like it for folks that should be tired, but they're too anxious and thought runny to be tired. So not the same as passion flower. Passion flower is like, I am tired, but my thoughts are racing. Motherwort is like, oh, I'm not tired. I'm great. Everything's fine. I should be tired, but I'm not tired. You take some motherwort and then conk. You're like, your body was really tired. Or someone that, will take that and then all of a sudden just like feel like they're falling asleep. Does topical application of kava also come with a liver stress? No, it does not. Or with frequent alcohol consumption. Nope, it's not a dumb question. Not at all. It does not. So it's localized. So you can use it. It's really great as a massage oil. I love the feeling of kava. I love the feeling of kava in a bath. Caveat, special occasions, because kava's expensive. Kava's expensive, right? So that's like, you got to get a good, like, at least a fourth of a cup, if not more, like a half of a cup to knead under that hot water. But if you're a person that likes special occasion baths, put some Epsom salts, you get your good smelly oils in there, and then some kava is wonderful. You'll feel like your body weighs 1,000 pounds in like the best way. People that like weighted blankets really like that kind of kava bath. Is it better to use glycerite for motherwort? So motherwort is bitter, and so it works as a glycerite as well as a tincture. It also works well as a tea. It just doesn't taste very nice. And you don't want to do a whole cup. It would be in formulation. You could do a tiny part of motherwort. But the glycerite doesn't work better than the tincture. Kava is not addictive. Mimosa, Jeff. So I don't use mimosa very often for sleep or even to we're thinking about like that path to sleep. We're going to talk about that right in just a minute, but basically that like sleep isn't just about taking something right before you go to bed. You need to have your routine and make sure that there's this kind of 3-part support stress during the day, support with herbs through your evening routine, and then take something, to go to bed. So we're having this kind of 3-part system. So mimosa, I think of mimosa is very, especially the flower, it's very uplifting. It's very like up floaty in the clouds. And so I think for some people, taking it right before bed might not be the best thing, because it might keep their brain kind of awake. I think of mimosa during the day and in the evening for folks, especially the flower. The bark is more sedating and a little bit heavier than the flowers. You can pair them together to have a balanced formula. I think of mimosa for depression and for anxiety that causes that kind of rebound depression. But not something I would necessarily personally formulate with for like an evening or a sleep formula. Kava is too warming. It is a very warming herb. You find that you have achy spots on the scalp after using it. That's interesting. It might, I really don't know how to answer why that would happen. I mean, it moves a lot of blood. In general, it's a warming herb. It is moving a lot of blood and kind of causing relaxation. But that specific achy spots on the scalp is a pretty unique symptom. Let me parse that out, and then I have your email, Dawn, because I know you emailed today. We'll think through it and email you if we think of anything. So if you feel like kava is too warming, but you like its effects, you need to pair it with something cooling to make it more balanced. So you can try it with linden, you can try it with motherwort, you can try it with hops, although hops is very sedating. It's one of our strongest sedatives. So make sure you want to be sedated if you pair it with hops. Kava and hops are both very, very they're not pushy, they're strong. They're one of our stronger, moderately strong remedies. I think if I was going to put kava and hops in a formula, I'd want it with something pretty neutral like passion flower or like milky oats. So thinking about when you're formulating, but you're balancing that strong heating and that strong cooling with maybe like thinking of a synergist, something that can bring those energetics together in a way that doesn't make your body feel confused. But I don't think if you really like kava, I don't think you need to not take it. I think that just, blue vervain is a great herb for anxiety. And you could maybe try pairing it with blue vervain to take care of those effects. That's an herb that I don't use a lot for sleep, but taking a few droppers of blue vervain will also knock you out if you're the right constituent. It will. I have this funny story. So years ago, when I was first meeting Thomas, I studied on the West Coast and was pretty bioregional, so I hadn't used blue vervain a ton because it didn't really grow much out there. And I misunderstood the dosing, and so I was taking like 5 or 6 drops. I was just facing it, and it didn't make me sick. It didn't, the bitterness didn't make me nauseous, but I was nodding out in class, like falling asleep in class. Thomas says blue vervain is really good for those like tight-necked overachievers who don't like to ask for help. And it is one of those herbs that for the right person can be really great in the evening routine. It can help you turn your like obsessiveness off, or like if you have obsessive thoughts or like thoughts that just won't go away. It could be really helpful for that. Muscle tension. So if you're at the computer like this and you get off and you can put your arms down, but they're still up like this, blue vervain will really help relax those shoulders. What herbs are, I missed that one. For clients needing urgent sleep, haven't slept for 2 to 3 days, wild lettuce versus kava, I would all the way do fluid extract of kava. I don't think that I haven't seen wild lettuce be particularly useful for sleep. Same thing with California poppy. I would also think for if it's for clients, who are really need emergency sleep, there are also supplements that I would think about for sleep. There's a formula called Theanine Supreme, and it has a bunch of stuff in it. It's not all herbs, so there are some herbs, there's some lemon balm, some holy basil, but it's kind of like a knock you out combo. So it's got like L-theanine and GABA and Relora, which is philodendron and magnolia bark. It's kind of like a proprietary combo of those two herbs. So it's got a bunch of stuff together, and a couple capsules of that mixed with, just classic sedatives can be really useful. I love blue vervain. It's one of the herbs that makes me normal. Let's see. What other herbs do we got? We talked about kava. Really, the last herb that I want to bring up just like a little bit before we do some formulating is lobelia. So lobelia is a really strong antispasmodic. It's a lower dose, but not a drop dose herb. So lobelia has gotten a bad rap as an herb that's like dangerous. It's not dangerous. If you take too much, it'll make you puke. It's not, but it'll make you puke in like kind of the way that Epicac would make you puke. But you have to take a lot of it. Like I've taken 4 droppers, 5 droppers, and it hasn't done that. You don't need that much. I think that like we teach our students, when we're doing a low dose botanicals weekend, although it's not a dangerous low dose, it's a lower dosage plant. It's not dangerous. So we push the upper edges of all of those low dose herbs to kind of understand the window. So it just has a smaller window of dosage. You can start with 5 single drops. You can work yourself up to like 15, 20, even a milliliter in extreme circumstances is fine. It shouldn't cause nausea. I wouldn't do that to little kids. I give lobelia to kids in small doses, 2 or 3 doses for asthma and other things. It's an amazing musculoskeletal relaxant, and it can be a really good catalyst for a formula. So it's going to relax your muscles, which will help with your mental state. And so that's why I like to bring lobelia up. It's also an acrid herb. So you'll get the kind of funny feeling, like almost like you puked. Like, oh, I just puked. I got this like that kind of feeling and taste in the back of your throat. That's what acridity is. But it is useful in small doses. It's super safe in small doses for acute tension. Always use as part of a formula. It's really good if part of your anxiety sleep pattern is if you lay on your stomach when you're going to bed and you can't take a deep belly breath, it might be useful to try 5 or 6 drops of lobelia with your nervous system formula, because it, along with relaxing everywhere, it has an affinity to the lungs, and I also think to like that diaphragm area. I know that when I'm anxious and tense, and I can't take that deep breath, lobelia can really create some space to take a deep breath. So that's when I would use lobelia. I don't use it very often for sleep formulas, but when it's needed, it can be really, really helpful. So acrid. It is acrid. It's very acrid. All right. So let's throw out some scenarios. And then we can sort of like formulate together. And we can do that for a few minutes before we, get off. What do we got? That's so interesting about lobelia and abdominal tension. I'm taking a singing class right now and have noticed I struggle to take deep breaths. Oh, it's absolutely worth it to try lobelia. Also, drop doses of calamus can help, kind of for a different reason. But it can kind of open everything up. But yeah, I would absolutely try lobelia.
I had a question about a person in my family that is ex-military and all the things that come with that, kind of PTSD. And they really struggle. And they're going through something with their wife who is very ill in the hospital right now and has a small child. He really struggles to slow down. Earlier when you mentioned chamomile and blue vervain, I was like, ooh, this kind of sounds like the beginning point if I was to, suggest something to him.
Mhm.
But if you had more kind of suggestions for that specific kind of scenario, people who are kind of constantly in that hyper vigilant, have that kind of constant, trauma that they live with and struggle to regulate, they struggle to keep sleep hygiene, and things like that. So kind of herbs to give in combination to kind of maybe slow down the movement because this person moves very fast. And then they have really terrible sleep hygiene. And I feel like it would help if they slowed down and improved their sleep hygiene. But, compliance is also the other factor. So something that is enjoyable, because we've mentioned so many herbs that are not always super tasty. But chamomile and blue vervain sounded really promising when you mentioned that. So I just wanted to know if you had anything to add to that with this kind of specific info.
Yeah, so PTSD is pretty complex in terms of what is needed to down-regulate. But I do think that paired, like oddly, folks that are dealing with hypervigilance do well with very gentle things and drop dose strong things and don't do as well with the moderately sedating things. I don't know why. That's also anecdotal. That's in my practice. I do work with a lot of folks with like mental health and I'm kind of like PTSD and yeah, but that grain of salt. That's why I think like that chamomile blue vervain would be a good combo. Ideally, he would drink the tea. That being said, what does he like to do at night is what I would say. And this is like a little beyond ourselves, right? But what we would do, like in formulating, it's not just about the herbs, but it's about fitting the herbs into our life in a way that feels useful. So there are relational aspects to formulating that are really important. Like you said, compliance, right? Or the ability to do the thing we suggest is it's on us as for those of us that are practitioners to make sure it fits in, right? And so maybe he wouldn't do a tea. Maybe you could make a delicious glycerite and he could put it in fizzy water. That's pretty nice. Then if you put the bitters, then if you put a dropper of blue vervain on top of that, it's almost like a cocktail or like a mocktail. I would say kava would probably be really good if he's not a big drinker. Because it's strong and easy, you can make a fluid extract and it'll, someone takes, 3 or 4 or 5 mils of a kava fluid extract, they're going to feel it. He's going to slow down. So that's without a comprehensive program. Like if you're just trying to get him to like knock down and go to sleep, those would be good things.
I think a mocktail is like a beautiful idea because he's not a big drinker, but whole idea of having a settling down. Oh, sorry, a pot is boiling over. Is a great idea. So I think that mocktail idea is a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you get really good high quality, like either fresh chamomile or like grow it, or make sure it's just like look like freshly dried, isn't like years old, to make that glycerite. And you can do a sealed simmer glycerite make it quickly. So it's basically like you're canning. For folks that have that experience, but you put the right amounts of glycerin and herb into a canning jar and simmer it while it's sealed for a few hours. So glycerites are really good at pulling out aromatics. Heat is also really good about pulling out aromatics, but if you heat a glycerite when it's open, the aromatics are going to load up and dissipate. So that's when like a sealed simmer can be really useful. That's what I do almost always when I make glycerites, unless it's something that I'm just trying to extract bitterness out of it. Can you add a tincture to a tea to create a blend? If you do not have all the dried or all tincture. Oh, absolutely. I very commonly. So the goal is, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but as a formulator, no matter where you are at in your herbal practice, the goal is like, if you're a Scrabble person, or if you like know Scrabble, like the double and the triple word scores, right? And so the beauty and the fun and the puzzles of formulas are trying to pick the herbs that'll do the most things that fit the person. And oftentimes, because we're all working with home apothecaries generally, we are going to need to blend tinctures and glycerites and teas, and we're going to have to get creative, and all of that can work. If you have a tincture that's highly aromatic and you want those aromatics to stay, just wait until the tea cool. Like, don't do it when the tea is boiling hot. Put that in right when it's drinking temperature, and then you'll preserve more of the aromatics that way. And that's kind of all that I could think about. Glycerites hold on to their aromatics a little bit better, right? They're more stable. So they're like stuck in that glycerin. It still will evaporate, but you don't have to worry about it as much with a glycerite as with a tincture. I know there's lots of questions here. I thought I've missed some of them. Let me go up here. Lobelia, I read that one. I do not use ghost pipe for stress and for PTSD or trauma because I think that it's a protected herb. We don't use that clinically. The only time I tell people I know that there's a lot of indications that's floating around that have to do with that. I usually tell people to to find that and learn about it, or maybe spend time with the plant if you are in a place that it grows. In extreme circumstances, I might try a few drops. It's not going to affect the nervous system. It's more of like a drop dose, sort of like energetic medicine. The only time I use ghost pipe clinically is for pain when literally nothing else worked. When I've tried everything, including other very strong low dose botanicals like gelsemium and things that are really strong because of that habitat protection. What other catalysts lend themselves to a sleep formula? That's a good question. Everything else I can think of is super stimulating. Maybe ginger. So catalysts don't always have to move blood. We think about, at least in the way that I look at it, I have to talk to Thomas about that because I don't think about it always about blood moving or stimulation. I think that it's like we want herbs that are catalysts or synergists. So we don't need to do both. Sometimes we need to move a formula where we want it to go, right? So we're using herbs, we want to get them, the blood down to the pelvis. So we're using an herb like Don Quai that is going to move blood in the pelvis. Sometimes we just want to synergize things. We want to mix things together. And so an example of a synergist would be that milky oats I was talking about when Dawn was like, I love, here's kava. It's too warming for me. For sleep, maybe pair it with hops, but that is super, super intense. And kind of the two really intense herbs don't play super well together, but we can use a synergist to meld those together. That's something that's neutral, like milky oats, like passion flower. Yeah, so basically you don't always need a catalyst. You can look at it as a catalyst and or a synergist. And it's that goal of just like seaming the edges of your formula and making things nice. Lobelia is a good catalyst synergist that is it stimulating. So if you are wanting more of like that catalytic sort of a few drops of lobelia if it's energetically or like, qualitatively appropriate, would be a good thing to choose. I think a little bit of ginger in folks that aren't too hot is also great. Just a tiny, tiny piece. It's not going to be overly stimulating as long as you're not giving them too much. Ginger is a really good way a little bit of ginger is a good way to warm up a formula that needs to be really cooling. Licorice is great for taste. Are there other reasons to consider using it in a sleep blend? No, not really. It's like a pretty neutral herb. It's used in TCM a lot as a synergist, and I think it works really well for that. You can put a little part in it, so it's moistening. It's soothing to the digestive system, and it tastes really nice. And so those are the reasons that I would use it. I wouldn't think about it for sleep in general. Sleeplessness secondary to cannabis withdrawal, hops, definitely. So hops is in the same broad plant family as cannabis. It does not have the same effect, of course, but so hops can also be smoked. And I bring that up because someone's talking about cannabis. I think that you can blend it. You need to. It's really papery, so you have to blend it with something that has body, like corn silk, and maybe mullein. I think mulleine's really harsh. I think mulleine's a little overrated as a smoke, but you can use a little bit of it just to kind of put things together. But hops is enough like it that can be really helpful. So yeah, I would say that hops definitely, and then skullcap, because with any withdrawal. Part of what's going on in withdrawal, like tissue, so not addiction, tissue dependence. When your body, and technically cannabis can't do true tissue dependence, but whatever, it's close enough. You get enough physical symptoms that I feel like it's appropriate. Skullcap. Skullcap is, there's turning that sensory knob down overall. And a cornerstone of withdrawal, most types of withdrawal, the sensory knob is turned up to like death metal garage punk show. Like that's what's happening. All of your senses are just out of control. And so skullcap can help it turn that knob down. And they might just like hops, whether to smoke it or to, it just might feel really good in their body since they're used to that cannabis. Which relaxing sleep herbs do not cause lucid dreaming? So to my knowledge, there are no herbs that I have heard of or heard herbalists talk about that particularly cause like lucid dreaming in a lot of people. Passion flower gives you lucid dreams, so you can't take it. You sleep best if you don't remember dreams. So that is cannabis. I know we were just talking about cannabis withdrawal, but small amounts of cannabis can be really helpful for too much vivid dreams, for lucid dreaming. For folks that are a little uncomfortable with cannabis as a whole plant, CBD, so CBD from cannabis it's helpful for sleep in general. Cannabis can be helpful for a lot of people, but CBD can be really helpful for sleep and for lucid dreaming and just kind of active, like that kind of active dream. Lavender is helpful for sleep. I think that lavender is not super sedative. You can't take enough lavender because it's so highly aromatic that you can't really take enough to be super sedated. Although someone that's really anxious and can't key down, that's appropriate for lavender, it might make them tired. It's not sedating them. It's just taking away the anxiety so that they can realize that they're exhausted. But yeah, I think that lavender can be helpful as like an in the evening routine. A lot of people like the taste. You can put a tiny bit in a tea. You can do, the tincture is great. I think also the lavender essential oil capsules. We don't use a lot of essential oils internally. Lavender essential oil capsules have been incredibly well studied for anxiety disorder and panic and stress and for depression. And so that can be really helpful. It just feels good, right? Taking lavender into the average body feels pretty good. And it's safe. I would stick to like 1 milliliter if you're doing standard tincture, because the aromatics are very strong. It's also a pretty bitter herb. So it could be nice in a tea or in a tincture blend for like after dinner because it's aromatic. It can help with digestion. So I guess yes, with the caveat that if it's, if we're looking at patterns and the pattern fits, the lavender pattern fits, then it can be useful for folks to take away that anxiety so that their body can go through that natural process of sleep. Excuse me. Tiffany, are there any questions that came up that I'm kind of looking here?
There were a couple that Jeff had that were a little bit needing Mel's touch on those.
Sure. I'm trying to go through. I'm not wearing my glasses, so did I not wear my glasses the whole class? Wow. Someone asked about true hot flashes. True hot flashes in terms of like what to do for hot flashes, or herbs for like sleep that happens with hot flashes. I don't know if the person who asked that's still there, still here. Are you concerned about folks who rarely dream? No, just because you don't remember your dreams doesn't mean your brain isn't active. I'm concerned if folks feel rested when they wake up and they have the energy to like do what they want to do in life. Not concerned about lack of dreams. A lot of people do look at phones and laptops before bed. I mean, we all do it. I do it still. But when I'm in periods of like insomnia or when I have trouble sleeping is when I stop doing that and try to kind of get a book or get something, something that isn't a screen to look at. If an adult client's childhood history, possibly causative, suggests one particular herb, but the current symptom picture is very different and suggests a different herb, should you use both in a formula or just focus on creating a formula that addresses the current symptom herb formula? I would say focus on the current symptoms. So it's really great to understand where folks are coming from, but in my perspective, this isn't like necessarily something I've learned through, science or through, mental health practitioners, but we are who we are cumulatively because of everything that's happened. That doesn't mean that things haven't happened in childhood that still come up and cause effects, but we want to formulate for what's going on in the moment. I think probably there's there are like herbalists that do a lot of drop dose energetic sort of herbalism might feel a little differently, but the way that Thomas and I use herbs, it would be, and if we're working for sleep or something like that, I think it would be a lot better just to focus on the current. There was a question about herb shelf life. Would like to hear. What was the herb shelf life question? I don't think I saw that when I was muddling through. I'm gonna get my glasses. They're right here. My eyes are getting tired. Oh, yep, just got that one. Oh, you're welcome, Jeff. Nasal delivery for, no, not necessarily. I mean, the blood-brain barrier isn't going to let, it's not going to let stuff through necessarily. I mean, there are herbs that can be, whatchamacallit, my brain's getting slow. I'm getting mushy here. Herbs that can be absorbed through the skin or the mouth or the vagina, mucous membrane areas of our body. You could get some, but it's such a small surface area as opposed to the mouth that it's not like you wouldn't have, I see where you're going with it, but you wouldn't have a like a closer relation to the brain going nose through mouth. Although using herbs in the nose can be really great for breaking up, congestion and and things like that, but not necessarily for a nervous system. I would either avoid hops in cold constitutions, or I would put something in that was warming, because it's our most cooling sedative herb. Definitely. So we're thinking of neutral to warming, or like a neutral base with warming. Yeah, I would maybe try kava, like, because it's the warming. You could try valerian as well. If you're wanting a strong, like, kind of like a hit it hard herb, try valerian. Try it on the weekend if you've never tried it before, just in case it keeps you up. Definitely. Shelf life for dried herbs. Concerned about longer term dried herb storage and tincturing. So it really depends on the herb. There are some herbs that aren't good very long at all. Like peach leaf is like that, and they're just, so you have to. Roots generally are good, and I think that the goal is, if it looks and smells like, if it still looks and smells like the plant. I mean, looks meaning like, is it green if it's supposed to be green? If it's a flower, if it's rose, is it still red? If it's lavender, is it still purplish blue? Does it still have an aromatic smell if it's an aromatic herb? Then it probably is still effective. It might not be as effective, but you can keep a lot of herbs indefinitely, as long as it, tastes and smells like the herb. Lobelia as a dried herb and as a tincture needs to be replaced a little more frequently, like maybe even every year. I'm trying to think of other herbs that I like. Passion flower, not as old. I don't think it works super well as a tea when it's old. And with tinctures, you want to use the freshest herbs you can get. That's just, not all of us have access to like a local farm that grows passion flower and, or whatever, but there's also parts of the country that it's a weed, like Florida. You go to a park in Florida and you're like, whoa, it's gorgeous. And everyone there's like, no, it's a pest. It's like climbing all over these other plants. So it kind of just, that was a tangent, but it's kind of just depends on the herb. But yeah, overall, if it looks, smells, tastes like the plant, then it's probably fine to use. And then if it's older, make a tincture, figure out your dosage by trying it. So maybe it's an old passion flower. Maybe you're going to need 4 or 5 droppers instead of 2 or 3 droppers. And so just slowly trying it, as long as it's an herb that it's safe to do that, and kind of playing with it and figure out the dosage. Speaking of good quality, how long would be your maximum suggested storage if used well for dried herbs? Like I said, if you want a tincture, you should tincture it as soon as you get it. Absolutely. I mean, not like the same week, but I wouldn't necessarily wait months and months to make tinctures with the herbs, because you want them as fresh as possible. So dried herbs, out of the light, out of the heat, is good. If you have one of those vacuum sealers that has like a little fancy attachment to like suck the air out of jars, that will make them last longer. Make sure that everything is really dry before you vacuum seal it, or you're going to get some really gross science experiments when you open that jar next. I found myself with dried herbs at 3 to 6 months from overzealous ordering. 3 to 6 months for the average herb, as long as it's stored well and it's not getting direct sunlight, they should be fine. So those beautiful pictures on Instagram where people have these giant apothecaries with the clear jars, all of their herbs are like shit within a few, pardon my language, but like within a few weeks. So don't store your herbs aesthetically, or if you're going to, store some herbs for aesthetics and then put the good stuff like away and not in the sun. Let's see. Yeah, make strong teas. Use more. If your product is weaker, it's older, use more. You don't need to throw it away unless it's like brown and unrecognizable. Then probably put it in the compost. Is what I would say, or toss it. Oh, everyone, you're very welcome. It is short shelf life for lobelia. You just have to take a little more if it's older, and not always like that, but yeah, I've just found that I have to replace lobelia pretty pretty fast, or I just have to take more, which is a little nerve-wracking for folks that don't have a lot of experience, because you can take more and then at a certain point you'll get really nauseous from it. But just remembering that also it's not, even if you get nauseous and puke, it's not like poisoning you. It's just like Epicac kind of. It'll make you have an upset stomach. Just have some chamomile if you upset your stomach playing with lobelia. Oh, I'm thinking about my husband, a hot, dry person with chronic musculoskeletal pain and new anxiety causing problems staying asleep. Needs sleep ASAP. Does chamomile tea or tincture with passion flower, lemon balm, and skullcap, and maybe a few drops of lobelia sound reasonable? Absolutely, try that. I would say probably chronic musculoskeletal pain, if it's tense pain, to actually do more like 10 drops, 5, 7, 10, start with at least like 5, yeah, do more drops of lobelia, because they're going to need more. If a lot of the physical tension is causing mental tension. Something else that is not an herb that would be really good is magnesium. Magnesium glycinate will help with that muscle tension and get some blood flow in. And if you guys like to massage each other and or whatever, a topical kava you can make. But in terms of what you have, I think that's absolutely, just make the tea strong. Make it a standard infusion is an ounce of herb to a quart. So but at least if you're making, let's say you're making 16 ounces, put at least 4 tablespoons of combined herb in it and make it strong. I'd rather folks put more, like if taste is an issue, long infusions can start to taste a little bitter with chamomile. Put a lot in and only steep it for like 10 or 15 minutes and then rewarm it and put some honey in to take care of the bitterness. But absolutely, I think that's a good place to start. Lobelia tincture and the dried herb has a shorter shelf life than the average herb. It's still like a year or so. You just have to take more is kind of what we were talking about. Like if it's old, if you have a lobelia tincture that used to work at 5 drops and you take it and you're like, take 10 drops. It'll be fine. You're not going to puke from 10 drops. If you're like an adult that doesn't have a really, really sensitive stomach, like 10 drops is not, that's my starting dose with most people, most adults. Yeah. Blend with hops for smoking. So corn silk will help it because hops are really papery. So you're going to try and roll it up so you can put it in a pipe and smoke it by itself, and that would be, but if you're trying to roll it into something, you need something with body. So like corn silk is really nice. I am one of those people that do not like mullein. It's like the herb. I think it's harsh. I don't think it's very pleasant. I don't smoke herbs anymore, but I used to really enjoy that. Yeah, also Damiana is good. A little Damiana is good to blend with it because it has that heavier green taste that'll kind of balance out the paperiness of the hops. Oh, you didn't like it either. No, it's harsh. And it doesn't even taste that nice. Corn silk is so nice. It's cool. It almost like the smoke almost feels cool in your mouth. It's really nice. You're welcome. All right, folks. Does anyone have any other questions? My throat is getting dry. Back to the desert. I think I need an energetically appropriate tea after this conversation. Maybe some passion flower with some marshmallow or linden to kind of cool and soothe my talking voice. Yeah, Sarah, thank everyone. Thanks so much for coming. If you have any additional questions, let us know. You're welcome to email us, classes@Eclectic School of Herbal Medicine. You'll get me through there. Also, questions about the program, questions about, remember, we can support you in the free clinic. And we will put up class notes. So you'll get hygiene checklist, long notes from this class, a short checklist, and I feel like there was something else that I said I would put in that Tiffany will remind me of. So if you have trouble accessing the class, there's an actual classroom on our website for these free classes. So if you have trouble accessing that, email us and we'll get you in. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are in the world. Bye-bye.